said, would you do transition pictures for David Koresh, the leader of the Branch Davidian cult? It was a splinter group of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but it wasn't started by Koresh. It was started by a guy called Benjamin Roden, and David Koresh took over later on. That wasn't even his real name. His real name was Vernon Howell, but because he came to believe that he was a prophet and that he was part of the King David bloodline, as were his many, many children that he had with many, many wives, because of that, he changed his name to David Koresh. And honestly, the details of this cult are quite horrible. There's child abuse allegations, although they were never proved because people didn't come forward and make those claims. But they were an extreme group who went somehow from worshipping David Koresh and his teachings, which are all fire and brimstone and stuff, they went from that to stockpiling weapons in their compound in Waco. Inevitably, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms found out about this and descended upon the compound at Mount Carmel in Waco. There followed a 53-day siege, at the end of which many of the members of the cult were shot, including some of the children. Some were stabbed. It was quite horrific. And then the compound was set alight. Koresh himself died of a gunshot wound to the head administered by his assistant or friend or ally or whatever. But that does tie in, quite remarkably actually, with the pictures that I did. Because when I went into his energy, he was suddenly pushed backwards really, really fast. You know when people in sci-fi movies are in an airlock and then the door opens and they just shoot out or shoot in or whatever? It was like that. He suddenly went backwards at a really, really fast lick and basically just floated down like that and landed in a pile of soft linen, really soft linen that cushioned his fall. But he went right through and underneath and got stuck. So maybe at that particular point he thought, aha, this is my martyrdom. At one point he was going to go to Israel and become a martyr there. I don't know how, but he was going to do that. And then he settled for becoming a martyr in his own head in the USA. But he went through the bedding, beyond the illusion of being some kind of prophet and martyr, and got stuck in the space underneath, whatever that represents. And as I watched, it got darker and darker and darker and darker. It was actually almost black. And once it was black, this was some kind of reality dawning that he was dying and now dead. That block that he was in of darkness dropped into the metaphorical cave I always see. And it just sat there with him at the center of it, like a mosquito in amber. At this point, I waited and waited. Things have to unfold, and nothing happened. He just stayed in that block. And in fact, I went away and did other things and came back later to see if I could progress this further. And it struck me at this particular point that maybe we do have a time when we are meant to go. And if we accelerate that time, if we do it sooner, we disrupt the pattern of time and space, or the soul's path or something. And there's a waiting period then until everything catches up. I've seen that several times. People arrive early and the universe isn't ready for them. This was another example of that. And when I returned to the pictures, the cube, the block that he was in, the block of darkness, had dissolved. And now he was lying in a pool of whatever the block had been made of. But he didn't get up. He lay there and thought something like, they will come for me. I will be greeted. I will be met. I will just lie here until something happens. Now, my assumption was that he thought that God would come for him. He was a deeply religious man. But there was also a sense here of the mothership coming. Like, I will be visited. I will be welcomed by my people. Where is God? Where is the mothership? I'll just wait here till it/he arrives. And of course, nothing happened. Then the thought was, this must be the belly of God. This must be the entrance to heaven. And he found the tunnel, this symbolic tunnel I always see that leads towards the light. And he went up it and he thought, oh, great, there we go. That is the entrance to heaven. It was very clear cut in his head. He was a prophet. He was a messianic figure who was going to be welcomed into heaven the way he'd always predicted. And it did look as though that was the case. It did look as though he was going to be welcomed by the dome, the light that I always see. But then he got so far and he found that the rest of the corridor was blocked by, it wasn't a wall, it wasn't a pane of glass, it was more like a semi-reflective mirror, like you could see through it, but at the same time you could see your reflection in it, but it prevented him moving forward. In fact, it was trying to steer him down a little passageway off to my right when I was standing there. So he follows this up, and it's very narrow. And it's like if you were in a theatre going from the stalls to the upper circle. It goes round the back and up, and eventually, it's a bit like the tradesman's entrance, actually. It brought him to another little cave area, which had another dome in it, but the dome was really small. Came to that dome and thought, okay, well, fine. This is my entrance to heaven. I don't care what it looks like or what size it is or anything. And he went into it and sank through it. Now, I'm never given access to what happens beyond the light. And this was obviously an offshoot of the light. But I did get a feeling that it was full of gills, like horizontal gills that he had to pass through, and which took off a lot of the extraneous ego nonsense that he had taken on. Probably he wasn't a well man. He had mental issues by the feel of this. But some of whatever he'd accumulated had to be removed, which it was on the way down. And I assume he just goes down into the main light after this stuff has been removed. But he didn't get the through passage that he was expecting. He didn't get any privileges. He wasn't honored in any particular way. He wasn't greeted by God. And yet at the time that he went down that chute at the top, he still believed that he was going to be welcomed into heaven by Jesus and angels and whatever. He was in a state of delusion to the very, very end, but not necessarily with all the ego accoutrement that he had acquired over time. That's what seemed to have happened with David Koresh, a regular person who had convinced himself that he was a minor deity.